we've beaten this chainstay thing to death. And I think we've theorized about why that's kind of provides a handling characteristic that both of us seem to like. And for me, that usually ends up being in the category of front end grip. But we were talking a little bit prior, and I feel like you have another theory on kind of like how a longer or shorter chainstay like affects the ride dynamic of the bike, like outside of kind of what we've already talked about.
Yeah. So basically, I'm yeah, I tried to it's hard this whole thing is like hard to fully explain verbally but on a bike you can totally feel it, and we touched on this concept for sure in the enduro review. And basically I made these things. This is ridiculous looking, but yeah, it's like you have the Enduro S4, the Enduro S3, and what I did is I scaled this is the wheelbase. This is a model. You have to bear with me. So like this is say that this center point of this is the bottom bracket, rear wheel, front wheel. And what you do with this is you put pens in it, and then you can like draw on paper. And it's not perfect, but what it does help to visualize is when you go through a turn, if hypothetically if wheels left like a paint line on the ground and you were to just ride a turn, you would see the line that each wheel draws. And this is something that I've felt while riding, and then it's hard to describe other than like on say the longer front end with the same rear end. Like it feels like your front end is wider, like it wants to run a wider line, which makes sense because it's farther out. But the drawbacks of that is that like say you're trying to like get your elbow up or like be in an appropriate cornering position, then it's just harder to ride. Or like the example I used in the enduro videos, you're going into say a berm and it feels like your front wheel is up higher because it's it has to run a wider line because the front end is longer. So that was what I tried to show. And like on paper, like it's basically like it'd be like your front, say the difference between an S3 and an S4. I just use these because they're two bikes I have a lot of experience with, and one's bigger than the other. So the difference in like front wheel, I don't know what the proper term is, but say wider, the difference between the wheels, I guess, or arcs in the wheels is about 50 millimeters, which is 2 inches. Which if you were to take your hands and move them like 2 inches over, that's kind of the way I think about it. So it's going to affect your like ability to basically control the bike. And yeah, so that's just like the thing. But then also the other way I look at it is say you're coming into a corner and there's rocks, roots, or whatever there may be, and you want to like what would happen with say the S4. This is backtracking to a previous topic that's been beat to death, but like you go into the turn and say there's like rocks kind of like on the inside or whatever, and you want to not hit them, and you end up like your front you'll get around and then the rear just plows into it because it's lower down. And that's kind of what I felt. Or like say on off camber, it's like you have to like fight off camber harder, or it's like harder to like get grip on off camber for me. I know people that ride bikes with short chainstays and long fronts on off camber very well, but that's just my feeling. Shout out Miles Morgan on that evil. He would do some crazy things, but he's also extremely skilled and talented. So, but yeah, so that's like a counterpoint where it's like someone obviously can make it work, but maybe for his body dimensions or skills or ability. Once again, it's all personal preference, but at least when it comes to turning, that's what I feel is when the wheels are just in a different line, basically, or it's like the distance, and then
Yeah, once you kind of explain that to me, I feel like I understood that feeling in the riding with different bikes. Like that feeling on corner entry where like yeah, on the longer reach, shorter chainstay bike, the rear wheel is like falling to the inside, and you have to like really be conscious of like popping up and like an over exaggerated hop to the outside to like carve that arc that you want to. And
Exactly.
I feel like it also contributes to like that jackknife feeling when you're like coming into something tight and like your front wheel, you're like setting up to turn, but your rear wheel is like drifting to the inside a little bit. And then there's like that moment that I talked about on the stem video, um, where it's like if things don't work out how you want, like I think it just has a greater tendency to get that jackknife. Um, and I think that's honestly where a lot of those front end disappearing moments come, is like you're out of line in front of the corner, then it comes time to do the thing and do the corner, and then it's like they're not carving a good line, and it's like there's a weird jackknife things that happen, and then it just disappears, and that like kind of compounds with like the different body position and weights that like the chainstay also like is involved with. But um and you know, without trying to dog on any one bike or brand, you know, we messaged back and forth on like GoPro footage of the canyon. And I think
Yeah,
this person was riding one of the larger sizes, and like you can see it in the GoPro footage for sure. Like the front wheels up here, and it's just like it's not gripping and like cutting the arc ever. It just always seems like it's up high and outside of the corner. And like just watching the bike behave with that, it's just something I'm like way too familiar with. I'm like, I know what that is.
yeah, absolutely. No, it's just the way I feel like it's like you're riding like two different bikes almost. It's like
Yeah.
you're on like the rear wheel here, and like it's like say you're turning right. If you're turning right, it's just like you have to set up really really wide, and then you're like it's like you're riding with your handlebar. Like instead of like the bike being like in between your legs, it's like the front wheel's like way out to the side, and then you're having to like
Yeah.
you're not able to like me personally, like I think what longer chainstays like the feeling you get is you can like really ride through your feet
Mm-hmm.
and like drive with your feet, which is your legs are like twice as strong as your arms at least. So like, it's efficient and it makes sense that if you can like really plant with your feet and like going back to Sam Hill, like the dude rides with his feet.
Yeah,
Like you can
dude.
watch how he's driving with his feet and then just kind of like loose arms and you know if you want to the dude knows how to ride a bike very well. And like yeah, that's like my biggest thing is you get on a bike with like short like the less balance and it's really you can't ride with your feet because the front end is like way out to the side and it's
Yeah.
strange
You're just
and it's
trying to like,
difficult.
yeah, you're trying to rein in the front end, and like, yeah, that just like puts more weight on your hands and stuff. And yeah, like kind of the counter example is like when I think back to, you know, riding with the Banshee, especially, um, and the Forbidden, it's like, yeah, that whole concept of like the wheels just being in line, more in line. It just it's hard to describe, but it just seems to make sense. And like I feel like I can feel that, and I think that just makes it like more predictable to hold the line, and I feel like it just makes you able to feel the traction a little bit better.
Yeah, no, and it's just easier to ride like
Yeah,
it. And if it like the front end will like go but it doesn't like wash. Like that's at
yeah,
least like when I went from the the Firebird to like the Enduro. Like I could push so hard on that bike, and the front end would wash and like push, but it never would go. And it's way
yeah,
easier to manage that is when you know that that's what the bike's gonna do because it's just pushing, which isn't great. But I'd rather have my front end like wash or not wash, but like be pushing, but still holding traction than
it's
pushing and
it's
losing
still
traction.
gripping. It's not
Yeah, it's
it's not disappearing. And yeah, like on the Banshee, I especially with the 460 chainstay, because it just that going that much further makes some weird. It just makes the bike handle differently, and it's then there's like so much weight on the rear end, it's like almost washing for a different reason, is because it's
yeah,
like you're like actually putting too much force on the tire. But it's like that sort of wash is completely different than having no weight. And
yeah, just overloading and what?
Yeah, and like especially with the long chainstay, I had some of the longest front drifts of my life, but like those end much differently than the type of front wash that comes with no weight on the front wheel, and it's a much higher probability that you're going to ride those out. And rein it back in. There's at least a possibility of reining it back in. And most times, if you're doing that sort of crash, it just ends with the low side. That slowly comes about. It's not like a boom. You're on the ground without even thinking about it.
Yeah, you don't just get shot from like a sniper in the woods and your front
Yeah,
end's
dude.
just boom, gone.
Yeah, dude.
Hit the deck.
I'm over having those sorts of crashes, dude. I mean,
it hurts.
Yeah, it's brutal.